Hi, I'm Amber O'Neal Johnston, also known as Heritage Mom, and I'm here to talk to you today about mama culture. So let me start with a question. Who were you before you became someone's mom? Not what you studied in college, not the job you had before children, not the line on your resume. I mean the woman underneath all of that. What made you curious? What kinds of books did you love? What conversations made you lose track of time? What places made you feel alive? What dreams quietly lived in your heart? If you're struggling to answer those questions, you are not alone. For many mothers, especially homeschooling mothers, those answers become harder to remember with each passing year. Our days are wonderfully full. We spend them reading aloud and explaining fractions and cleaning the kitchen for what feels like the fifth time before lunch. We search for missing library books and drive children to music lessons, answering endless questions, preparing meals, folding laundry, trying to keep everyone emotionally afloat. It's beautiful work. It matters deeply. I personally wouldn't trade it for anything. But somewhere along the way, many of us begin to believe that our own growth can just wait. We'll read that novel later. We'll visit that museum another time. We'll learn that language when the children are older. We'll write and paint or travel and sing or study someday. And someday quietly stretches into years. I don't think this happens because we stop caring about beauty or learning or creativity. I think it happens because motherhood is an act of continual self-giving. Day after day, we pour ourselves into the people we love most. The problem is that if we're always pouring and never replenishing, eventually we begin to feel the effects. Maybe you've experienced it. You aren't necessarily burned out. You aren't unhappy. You love your family, but something feels flat. You find yourself going through the motions instead of feeling genuinely delighted by the life you've worked so hard to build. I've learned that what often needs renewing isn't our homeschool, it's us. That's really what I mean when I talk about mama culture. Mama culture isn't another item to do on your to-do list. It isn't a curriculum or a challenge or a set of rules to follow. It's really just the intentional cultivation of your own inner life. It's continuing to grow while you're helping your children grow. It's believing that motherhood doesn't erase the person you were created to be. Instead, it gives that person new opportunities to love, to learn, to flourish. I think we sometimes imagine that investing in ourselves somehow takes away from our children. But I've actually found the opposite to be true. Children don't simply learn from what we teach, they learn from who we are. They notice what excites us. They notice what captures our attention. They notice whether we're still curious or if we're still learning or whether we still wonder about the world around us. Think about the adults who influenced you most when you were growing up. My guess is that you don't remember them because they knew all the answers. You remember them because they loved something. Maybe it was history or birds. Maybe it was music or literature or gardening. Their enthusiasm drew you in. Their delight became contagious. That's one of the greatest gifts that we can give our own children. Not perfection, thankfully, not endless energy, not a beautifully color-coded homeschool schedule, but a mother who is still fully alive, a mother who still gets excited about ideas, a mom who still laughs and wonders and notices beautiful things and asks questions that she doesn't yet know the answers to. Because when our children see that learning is woven into the fabric of ordinary adult life, they begin to understand that education isn't something you finish. It's simply part of being human. It's ongoing. Looking back, I realize that's what I wanted for my own children all along. Yes, I wanted them to become capable readers and thoughtful writers. I wanted them to understand history and appreciate great books. I wanted them to know the world that God created and to love their neighbors well. But underneath all of those goals was something even deeper. I wanted them to become people who remained curious long after they left my home. And I still want that for them today. The surprising part was realizing that if I wanted that for them, I had to want that for myself too, because it's difficult to raise lifelong learners if we've quietly stopped learning ourselves. It's difficult to cultivate wonder in our children if we've forgotten what wonder feels like. And it's difficult to invite our children into a really rich and beautiful life if we're actually no longer pursuing one ourselves. That realization really changed everything for me. Definitely not overnight, not with some dramatic reinvention. It began with very small choices that over time reshaped not only my homeschool, but honestly, my own heart. And it all started with one unexpected question. And that was, what do you want to be when you grow up? So, several years ago, when my children were little, I went to a mom's night out with a group of friends. It was one of those rare evenings when everyone had managed to arrange babysitters, and for a couple of hours, we weren't packing lunches or wiping noses or reminding anyone to brush their teeth. We were simply women sitting around a table, actually in a coffee shop here in Atlanta together. And at one point, the hostess asked us a question. She said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And we all kind of just laughed, like nervous laughter. We were already grown up. We were wives and mothers, homeschoolers. Some had careers before children, others had been home for years. But that wasn't what she was really asking. She wasn't asking what we did. She was asking who we still hoped to become. And I remember sitting there feeling almost embarrassed. At the time, I had very young children. They were 5, 4, 2, and I was pregnant with my youngest. Now they're nearly 17, 15, 13, and 11, and they can do so much on their own. But back then, my days were completely consumed by motherhood. I hadn't read an entire book for myself in years. I wasn't working on a project. I didn't have a platform. I certainly wasn't speaking anywhere. And if you had looked at my life from the outside, there would have been absolutely no evidence that anything remarkable was about to happen. And yet, when it came time to answer the question, I quietly admitted something that I really hardly dared to say out loud. I said, "I think I'd like to be a writer." And then I kind of laughed, like, because I knew it sounded ridiculous. What would I write? I had no idea who would read it. I couldn't even imagine. Someone asked what I wanted to speak about or write about, and I said, "I have no idea." There wasn't a plan or a strategy. I didn't even have a first step. There was simply a longing. And looking back now, I realize how important that moment was. Not because I suddenly became a writer, because I didn't. Nothing changed the next morning. There wasn't a book contract waiting in my inbox. There wasn't an audience. There wasn't some dramatic turning point. There were dishes and laundry and diapers and bedtime routines, the ordinary faithfulness of motherhood. But something had changed. For the first time in a really long time, I had remembered that there was still a part of me that wanted to grow. And that's where mama culture begins, not with achievement, but with remembering. Remembering that you are still allowed to become. And for me, those first steps were almost invisible. I'd spend the day learning alongside my children, and if we stumbled across something that really interested me, I would take the time to learn more about it. And I would look for opportunities to follow up on that. Sometimes it was a poem or an artist that I'd never heard of. Sometimes it was a historical figure who had somehow been left out of my own education. I wonder how that happened. I wasn't studying because anyone assigned it, and I wasn't trying to earn a degree or pass a test. I was just simply following curiosity, and curiosity has a wonderful way of leading us somewhere we never expected to go. So before long, I found myself completely captivated by Black history and literature and music and art. And I wanted to understand the stories I hadn't been taught. I wanted to know the writers whose voices I'd never encountered. I wanted to discover the beauty and the resilience and creativity and imagination that I know had always been there, even if no one had introduced me to it. I read about the Harlem Renaissance. I discovered poets whose words stayed with me for days. I listened to music with new ears. I found myself really falling in love with history, not because I had to memorize dates like I did in school, but because I was meeting people. And these people's lives enlarged my own, and something really surprising happened. I began looking forward to those quiet moments at the end of the day, and it wasn't because I was escaping motherhood, but because I was bringing myself back to it. Every book I read made me a more interesting conversation partner around the dinner table. Every poem gave me new language for the world. Every story deepened my compassion. Every new discovery reminded me that there was still so much beauty waiting to be found. And at the time, I couldn't have told you where any of it was leading because I wasn't building a career. I wasn't building a life outside of my home. And years later now, I can see those evenings really differently. Those quiet hours became the seeds of everything that came afterward. They eventually led me to write A Place to Belong. They shaped my book Soul School. They even influenced the last book, Homegrown. But that's not only obvious in hindsight. At the time, or that is only obvious in hindsight, because at the time they all felt wonderfully ordinary. And maybe that really is the whole point. We tend to think of our lives as changing through these really big dramatic moments, like there's a new job or a big move across country or some opportunity. But more often, I think our lives are shaped by small, faithful decisions that we just choose to repeat over and over again. Reading one more chapter, listening to one more lecture, or visiting one more exhibit, keeping one more notebook full of ideas, or paying attention to what makes our hearts come alive. None of those choices seemed significant to me on their own, but I now know that together they changed me. Not because they made me an author, but because they made me more fully myself. And that's the invitation I want to extend to you today. You don't have to know where your curiosity will lead. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need to monetize your interests or turn them into a business. You simply need to give yourself permission to follow what brings you to life. Because when a mother comes alive, her home cannot help but be changed by it. So one of the greatest surprises of motherhood is realizing how much our children absorb that we never intentionally teach. They hear us marvel at a sunset. They notice the music we play while making dinner, or they see the books lying open on the coffee table. They overhear conversations that we have with friends, sometimes too much. They watch what we laugh at and what moves us to tears and what captures our attention. And long before they can explain it, they're being shaped by the atmosphere we create. So as homeschooling parents, we spend a lot of time thinking about curriculum. Which math program should we use? Should we study ancient history this year or next? Or how much writing is enough? And these are all worthwhile questions. I don't want to make light of them. They're important. But I've really become convinced that some of the most important parts of our children's education happen way outside the lesson plan. They happen because our homes become places where beautiful things are loved. Not performed, but loved. And children can tell the difference. If I tell my kids they should appreciate poetry, that's one thing. But if they walk into the kitchen and find me smiling over a poem with my big mug of hot tea, that's something entirely different. If I assign them great books, but never read one myself, they'll notice. If I tell them learning is exciting, but I haven't been curious about anything in years, they'll notice that too. Our enthusiasm, or our lack of it, quietly teaches our kids every day. That's why I don't think mama culture is separate from homeschooling. I think it's one of the deepest parts of it, because the goal isn't simply to raise educated children, it's to build a home where everyone is still becoming. I remember when my own interests began changing the rhythm of our family life. And as I became more interested in Black literature and history, I naturally began sharing pieces of it with my children. not because it was Tuesday at 10 o'clock on the schedule, but because I couldn't wait to tell them what I'd discovered. I'd read this like beautiful poem and I'd think, oh, my kids have to hear this. I'd learn about an artist and immediately want to look at the paintings together. I'd discover a piece of music and call everyone into the living room. And sometimes we'd end up in conversations that lasted an hour, and sometimes they'd ask questions. A lot of times they asked questions that I could not answer. I was uncovering this kind of right alongside them. Sometimes we'd simply just sit together after finishing a story that had really touched all of us. And none of that felt like checking a box. It felt like sharing something I genuinely loved. I think that's how culture is passed from one generation to the next. It's through affection. We invite our children into the things that have captured our own hearts, and they begin to love those things too. Not always the same things and not always in the same way, but they learn that a meaningful life is one filled with curiosity and beauty and ideas and wonder. I've noticed this happening in so many unexpected ways over the years. So one child develops an interest in birds because we've spent years stopping to notice their little calls in the morning. Another becomes fascinated by history after overhearing conversations around our dinner table. And yet another starts keeping a commonplace notebook because she's seen me copying down passages and quotes that I never want to forget. And none of those things were forced. They simply grew in the soil of our everyday life. And I feel like that's how most of the best things grow. They grow slowly and quietly, and usually they go almost unnoticed. And I think we underestimate the power of ordinary days. We imagine that what shapes our children are only these big experiences and big conversations, the once in a lifetime trip, the perfect curriculum, an unforgettable field trip. And yes, of course, those things are wonderful and they matter, but I suspect that our children will remember something else. They're going to remember a mother who always had a library book nearby, or who stopped to admire the dogwood trees every spring, a mother who loved old hymns or jazz or watercolor paintings or gardening or biographies or embroidery, a mother who never acted like learning only belonged to children. That kind of home really leaves a mark, and it's not a mark that's left because it's a perfect home, but because the home is alive. There's another reason I believe that this matters, and I think that's that our children will someday, God willing, become adults. Many of them will become parents. Whether they homeschool or not, they'll eventually face the same question we all do. What does adulthood look like? If adulthood looks like the end of curiosity, why would anyone be eager to grow up? If it looks like exhaustion, basically no delight, what is it that we're really inviting them into? But what if they grow up believing something different? What if they leave home expecting that they'll always have something they're learning, some way that they're growing, something beautiful that they're discovering? What if they believe that 40-year-olds can still dream, or that 50-year-olds can still begin something new, that grandparents can still be students? I think that would just be a wonderful gift for us to give our children. And it begins much closer to home than we think, because it begins with us. Not by becoming extraordinary women. We have too much pressure already on ourselves for that, but simply by refusing to stop growing. Because every time you nourish your own mind, every time you follow your curiosity or make room for new things in your life, you're doing more than enriching yourself. You really are quietly giving your children a vision of what a rich and meaningful life can look like. And I think that's one of the most enduring lessons that they'll ever receive from us. So if you've listened to all of this and you're thinking, this sounds wonderful, but my life is already too full, I understand, because I have been there. There were seasons when my children were so little that reading 3 uninterrupted pages felt impossible. There were years when sleep was more valuable to me than almost anything else. And there were days when simply making it to bedtime felt like a huge accomplishment. Mama culture is not about pretending that those seasons don't exist. It's about believing that even in those seasons, you are still worth nurturing. Not because you've earned it, not because you've checked everything off your list, simply because you're a person. You're not just a provider. I think we sometimes believe that we have to wait until life settles down before we begin investing in ourselves. When the baby sleeps through the night, when the children are more independent, when we finish this school year, when the house is cleaner, when there's more money, when things finally slow down. But motherhood has this way of constantly moving the finish line. There's always another season waiting, another responsibility, another reason to postpone becoming the person that you're being invited to become. So I guess what I'm saying today is, what if we stopped waiting? What if we stopped believing that growth only happens in these large blocks of uninterrupted time? Because my own experience has taught me something very different. A rich life is built in small moments. It's reading one chapter of a book before you go to bed, one poem while the soup simmers, one museum on a Saturday afternoon, one thoughtful conversation with a friend at a coffee shop, one notebook filled with quotations you never want to forget, one audiobook while you're driving the kids to practice, or one new artist playing softly while everyone folds laundry. These moments, I know while I'm talking about it right now, can seem insignificant, but they're not. They're slowly shaping the kind of person that you're becoming. And as you become, your home becomes. So years from now, I don't think my children will remember every lesson we completed or every curriculum we used. Some of those details, honestly, have already even faded from me. But I hope that they'll remember something else. I hope they'll remember that our home was a place where books were loved, where ideas mattered, and questions were welcomed, where music filled the rooms, where beauty wasn't reserved only for special occasions, and where learning wasn't something children did between the hours of 9 and 3. It was simply how we all lived. And more than anything, I hope they'll remember that their mother never stopped growing. Not because I was trying to impress them, but because I wanted to remain fully awake to the world God had made, to keep noticing, to keep wondering, to keep learning, and to keep becoming. And I really want that for you too. And I know I think it will make you a better homeschool mom, but that's not really the reason why. Not because it will make your children more successful, though I think it would do that too, and not because it will lead to a book contract or a new career or some impressive accomplishment. Those things may come, they may not. That's not the point at all. The point is that your life has value beyond just what you produce for other people. So your curiosity matters, your imagination matters, your delight matters, the books you read matter, the art that moves you matters, the conversations that stretch your thinking matter, the dreams that have quietly waited in the corners of your heart still matter because you matter. You mattered before you became a mom. You matter while you're raising children, and you'll matter long after your children have grown and left your home. Motherhood is one of the greatest callings many of us will ever receive, but it was never meant to consume the whole of who we are. It was meant to deepen us, to expand our capacity for love, to enlarge our compassion, to sharpen our wisdom, to make us more fully ourselves. So this week, I want to leave you with the same question that changed me all those years ago. What do you want to be when you grow up? Don't answer with a job title. Don't think about whether it's practical or possible or whether you're qualified. Just listen. What makes your heart come alive? What have you always wanted to learn? What beauty have you been postponing? What curiosity have you been quietly setting aside? Think about it and then take one small step. Not 10, just one. Read that first chapter, buy the sketchbook, plant the flowers, listen to the symphony, sign up for the class, write the first paragraph, whatever it is, just begin. And it won't be because you have something to prove, because your children deserve to see what it looks like when a person never stops growing. And because somewhere along the way, you may discover what I did, that the very things that you thought were just for you become unexpected gifts to the people you love most. The life that fills your own soul has a way of overflowing into your family, and your delight becomes their delight, and your curiosity sparks theirs. Your courage gives them permission to be courageous, and your love of learning becomes part of your family's story. That's the beautiful mystery of motherhood. As we continue becoming more fully ourselves, we quietly invite our children to do the same. And I think that may be one of the most lasting gifts we ever give them. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about cultivating a rich home culture for your children that includes life-giving books and people and ideas and things, please visit me at heritagemom.com or on social media at Heritage Mom Blog. I also invite you to check out my books, A Place to Belong, Homegrown, and especially Soul School, a book that shows parents how to take children through Black American culture one book at a time. Thank you.
If you're still with us, don't go just yet. I want to ask you to take a look at our new book, Homeschooling Black Children on a College Pathway. This comprehensive resource includes narratives from half-dozen homeschooling parents who homeschooled children before, during, and after the COVID-19 global quarantine. The stories included in this book showcase strategies to prepare homeschooled children for STEM majors, college athletic programs, dual enrollment, and more. The book discusses the ways the metaverse can be used in college prep and how including a liberatory framework in your homeschool practice can garner positive outcomes for homeschoolers leaving home for college. This book also includes worksheets on how to have important conversations with your homeschool children and the entire family as you prepare your homeschoolers for their transition to college or university. This book is presented by Black family homeschool educators and scholars through the literary nonprofit Black Writers for Peace and Social Justice, Incorporated. Black family homeschool educators and scholars is the first U.S.-based research and education group dedicated specifically to the topic of Black family homeschooling, founded in 2020. Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars produces the annual BFHES virtual teach-in and presented the book Homeschooling Black Children in the U.S. Theory, Practice, and Popular Culture in 2022. Thank you for buying. Take care.